come today, Kenneth is not here because he's busy with his family. But we still have Andre here with us. Andre, do you want to say some things before we start?
Hi everyone. So glad to be here today. So yeah, looking forward to have a chat and a session with Jason to talk more about investing and everything we need to know. Okay, Jason, let's get started.
Yeah. Okay. So wait, I'm just zooming into the chart. Okay. So So today we're going to talk about the market in general. Like
Jason, is it possible to zoom a little bit more?
you know, because- you want to zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah, just
The thing is, it looks really big on my screen, but
I'm sure
yeah,
the
I guess
viewers can see
it's fine.
clearer as well. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it,
probably better.
the
Yeah.
the important thing is you're so right about that. Okay, so this is the Fed funds rate. So that's the interest rate, overnight interest rate. So I think we will start by talking about this interest rate first. But before that, let me ask Andre. Do you know what is interest rate? Like, what is a definition of an interest rate?
Um, to me, it's just an amount of money which the lender will be entitled to when lending the money to the borrower. So whether it is interest rate for property as mortgage or just personal loan or any loans even from the government or anything else, the lender got to benefit from lending money, isn't it? Generally, yeah. That's just the revenue of it.
Okay, before I say anything else, let me first give a shout out to Marco. If Marco is listening, it's hi to you. So, Marco is one of our most fervent fan of Jason Investing. Just want to give him a shout out first before we continue. Okay, so back to the interest rate. Okay, so a simple definition of interest is just the cost of borrowing money or the cost of money in general. So you can imagine if you want to borrow money, like the money that's a cost to borrowing it, right? So the cost is just the interest rate. You can just think of it that way. And the mother of all interest rate would be the Fed funds rate, and that is the overnight interest rate that banks charge each other for borrowing in the Fed central bank reserve, because banks, right, they need to keep a portion of their cash as required reserve in the central bank reserve. Do you know why banks need to keep extra reserve overnight the bank?
Bank need
Andre,
to reserve as I mean they need to have a amount of money first of all for their bank spendings and also need an amount just in case any borrower wants to uh I mean or if any of their customer need their money back or something like that, right?
yeah, exactly. So it's a regulatory requirement as well. And so basically, it's a way for the central bank to control how much money supply it is, right? So required reserve is one way of doing it, and by setting a target interest rate on these required reserves. Okay, so the thing is, some banks they might not have enough reserve to keep overnight with the Fed. So if they don't have enough reserve, what they could do is they can borrow from other banks which has excess reserves. So these banks that they borrow, the cost of the interest rate will be the Fed funds rate. And the Fed funds rate is determined in the FOMC meeting. So you can see that back in 2020, when the COVID pandemic happened, right? The Fed slashed the interest rate. So it caused all the interbanks lending to close to zero. So, and you might be wondering, how does the bank actually, how does the Fed actually controls the interest rate? So there is a way for the Fed to be able to make sure, in the past, they will use open market operations to do it. But now they will give interest on reserve that is sitting in the central bank. And also they have a standing repo facility that you could actually borrow from the Fed. By using these two uh, mechanism, they are able to limit the interest rate to be within a specific band. There's an upper and lower target band. So if we look at since August last year, the Fed has kept the rates um, the same. So they kept hiking rates, right, all the way from like February 2022, and they kept hiking rates until August, when they see that the inflation has came down a lot, but it's still above their 2% target rate. So now they just say, okay, you know what? We are not in such a rush to hike interest rate. We just wait and see, because there is a downside to hiking interest rate, and that is that it might cause the economy to go into recession. I mean, you can imagine why high interest rate would cause economy to go into recession, right? Because your borrowing costs for companies will increase, so the companies will tend to borrow less, and this has a deflationary effect on the economy. And also, consumers, they will take less credit, and so that will also ideally would reduce the demand for uh, uh, for consumption, for example, and various other. Ideally, that is supposed to work that way, but apparently, in this inflation hike in this moment, it seems like it didn't really achieve what they actually wanted to achieve. But then again, there's a lagging uh, in terms of hiking rates. So if you hike rates, say back in February 2022, right, you're not going to see the effect on the economy like right away. It takes on average about 1 to 2 years before you can actually see the economy starts to turn down, right? Like in terms of the GDP start to go down. But anyway, all these are more uh, interesting tidbits. But I think let's move on.
Yeah,
Okay,
just
so
before you move on, a few questions
mm,
about interest rates. One is that okay? So for example, from your chart graph, 2020 to 2022, between that the interest rate is almost just above zero. So I'm assuming that is a base interest rate from the Fed. But then I recall during that time, if interest rates are pretty much similar to property mortgage rates, but mortgage rates are not that low at that time, right?
uh,
So would
what
interest
time are you
rates
referring to? Is it during the COVID?
during yeah, so I don't recall mortgage rates if I borrow money from the bank as mortgage loan. I don't recall it being that low, or is it really that low at that time?
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure when you were talking about, because if you look at this is pretty much February. This is when COVID struck, right? I mean, that's the time when they started to close the borders and doing all the quarantine and distance keeping. So that is around like when the COVID numbers start to climb a lot. But before that, the interest rate has not actually been zero. So if you're talking about within this period of
The,
time,
mm,
probably interest rate is actually not
now
that
I'm
low.
talking now I'm talking about between 2020 to 2022 during COVID.
Okay, so during COVID,
Yeah, here.
okay, but the thing is, this is the base, this is the government Fed
Mm,
rate.
mm.
So any other interest rate, for example, mortgage rate, or they are you need to have a buff like a margin, another uh, premium stack on top of the interest rate, which
Okay,
means
so
that
the regulatory allows them not to be that low, that like instead of 0.2.
no, it's not that. It's because it's because okay, so this is the rate that banks borrow from each other. And when we're talking about interbank transaction, we're talking about very big banks that are lend, borrowing and lending each other, right? And they are able to lend at such a low rate, but for everyday people, we are not going to be able to lend at that rate.
Yeah, yeah,
So they
okay.
will add,
Once they
like for
they
example, they yeah, for example, you said the Fed rate plus another, like 200 basis point, like another 2%, So if it's near to zero, you will still have to pay 2%, or it could be higher than that, right? But if it's a 5% Fed funds rate, you add 2 more percent, that'll be 7%. It's similar to what happened in Japan, where they had a negative interest rate, right? Their overnight interest rate is actually negative,
okay, okay.
which means that by keeping extra cash with the central bank, you would actually have to pay interest rather than the central bank paying you interest. I mean, in terms of uh,
Mm.
you borrowing money, right? I mean, you borrow from other banks. You When you borrow money, instead of you having to pay interest, they have to pay interest to you.
I understand.
So yeah, but that is like, but the negative interest rate is only slightly negative, right? But when it comes to regular consumers like you and me, because you already add another margin on top of the low interest rate, it's no longer negative. So if
Yeah,
you want to say, oh, as a consumer, and I want a negative interest rate, say, oh, sorry, the negative interest rate is in the interbank market, but once it reach you, you have like a 2 or 3% or
yeah,
even more buffer on top of so you're not going
yeah.
to get that low.
Yeah, so obviously the margin for personal loan and margin for property mortgage loan is different, and the margin from consumers, like all of us putting money in the banks, they give super low margin. That's why the interest is peanuts, right? If we have, for example, savings bank or fixed deposit bank, the margin is so low.
Okay, that is actually another different story. So these are interbank interest rate. Okay, let's say if you want to borrow from a bank, if you want
Mm,
to borrow from a bank, they are definitely going to slap you with a huge margin on top of the base rate,
yes.
correct? But then when it comes to deposit, if you're depositing money to the bank can give you a very crappy interest rate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because yeah, and that interest rate is a little bit different from the interest rate that we're talking about. Because for
Uh,
example, now the Fed funds rate has gone up to 5%, right? It's like 5.33%. One thing you can guarantee is if I were to go and borrow from the bank right now, I mean we're talking about the US right now, okay? If I want to borrow from the US bank, am I going to get an interest rate that's higher than 5% or less than 5%? At 5.33 or less than 5.33? It's
uh,
definitely going to be more
more
than 5.33,
correct.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you deposit money in the bank, are they going to give you more than 5.33?
Probably not just about the graph we are showing here. Probably they are even going to remain almost stagnant to as low as possible. Zero
Yeah,
point
exactly.
something even. Yeah.
Okay, I'm
They,
not exactly
so,
sure how much they
yeah, so maybe
pay.
they don't even bother following the ups and downs of the interest.
But this is a good thing that you actually raised. But don't you feel that it's kind of weird when we talk about interest rate? Like for the base rate, this is like the risk-free rate, overnight risk-free rate. It's at 5.33. Like how can a bank actually pay you lower than that? Didn't I already said that this is like the base risk-free rate? So you cannot actually go lower than that, right? Technically, you cannot. how come banks, like commercial banks, they are able to get away with it? So interesting. Yeah, you
Mm.
want to say something? Yeah.
Because the money is coming from a different direction now, is coming in, so probably it affects certain economy in a different way.
You can think of it like it's a demand and supply thing.
Yeah.
So the commercial bank will actually tell you, take it or leave it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you take this interest rate or you leave it. I'm not going to give you anything higher. So that
Mm.
is the attitude of commercial banks
Yeah.
because they actually don't need so much cash.
Yeah.
They don't actually need that much cash, which is why they don't actually want to pay you a high interest rate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
able to get away with it is because they don't actually need the deposit.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I'm not exactly very well versed in this. But from what I know, banks are flushed with cash deposit or whatever. They have source of fundings, so they don't really need all this deposit, and so they are able to like just give you very misleading interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to borrow from a bank, oh, definitely it will be higher than this.
I mean, that's
Okay,
that's
now that
that's profit, right? Yeah. I mean,
yeah, by right,
there's profit. The profit is all about increasing the selling price as high as possible and decreasing the cost price as low as possible.
yeah. So basically, they're borrowing ideally at a lower interest rate, and they're lending at a
Mm.
higher interest rate.
Mm.
Okay, but the thing is, okay, this is a little bit complicated, but not all banks are are able to receive deposits from customers. Some banks, for example, investment banks, they have no way of uh, like you cannot go and open a bank account with
Mm.
certain banks, right?
Mm.
So they have no access to such cheap form of fundings. So they will have to borrow from other sources. And so they will be also, so all this higher interest rate will actually affect them as well. Which is
Mm.
why back, I think it was last year, you heard of the SVB banking crisis, right? Part of the reason why these banks are failing in the US is because their cost of funding has become higher. Okay, normally banks, what they do is that they borrow from short term and they lend it out long term. And they're betting that the yield curve is upward sloping and not downward sloping. Okay, you know what, before I say that, before I go into that, um, okay, let me first say something. This Fed funds rate that we are talking about right now is overnight interest rate. So do you know what it means exactly by overnight interest rate?
Mm. Something that
It's
is
just a
within 1 day,
yeah, it's just a 1 day interest rate. For example, your mortgage, how long do you think is the term, the maturity, the term for your mortgage?
25
Fif-
to 30
yeah,
years.
yeah,
25
15,
to 30 years.
25, 30 years, it's
30
a,
years.
it's a much longer term, right?
Mm.
So are you telling me that this 5.33% is also the same as the longer term interest rate, like 30-year interest rate?
Uh,
Because we keep emphasizing this is overnight, right? So how about like longer term interest? What if I want to borrow for a longer than 1 day? So what rate should I pay for it?
should be lower because, but it's like economies of scale, right?
Uh,
If you if
no,
you if you
this is we're
if
talking
you
about your skill is scaling in time domain. It's not in terms of the quantity. Your skill
oh,
is in terms of longer, right?
but
Okay,
if time, then it's
normally
compounded many times, right?
okay. Normally when we talk about interest rate, we're talking about annualized interest rate.
Mm.
So you annualize it to 1 year. For
Yeah.
example, 5.33%. Do you think this is a 1 day interest rate? 1 day I charge you 5%? It's like crazy, right?
Mm.
This is a 1 year interest rate.
Mm.
So a simple way is just to divide it by 365. You get it like a 1 day interest rate. So your 1 day interest would be like it would not be anywhere close to 5%.
Mm.
In fact, we can just do a quick calculation. So 5.33, right? Divided by 365. So your 1 day is like just around 1 basis point, like 0.01% interest for just 1 day, which is
Mm.
actually a lot. I mean, the fact that it's a 5% annualized rate is considered a lot. So every time we talk about interest rate, we're always talking about an annualized interest rate. So for example, if we're talking about, let's say it's 5%, right? 5%. If you want to borrow for 30 years, you have to make it the power of 30, right? So your interest would be like this much,
Mm.
right? Anyway, this is like 4 times, like 432%, right? So it is like this is compounding interest at play. So longer term, you end up paying more, but then
Mm.
you will have to annualize it down to like a 1 year.
Yep.
So yeah, so everything is annualized for a year. Okay, so the conventional thinking is the longer term, the duration, the longer term the debt, the higher the market will ask for its interest rate, right? That makes sense. But sometimes the longer term interest rate might be lower than a shorter term interest rate, which is actually the situation right now. But there's a lot of confusion. People think that, so you're telling me that if I borrow longer term, I'm paying a lower interest rate that I'm borrowing shorter term. That doesn't make sense, right? Because when we say it's lower, we're talking about the annualized rate, right?
Mm.
Because for example, you see, if I have a, for example, 5% interest, right? I borrow for 10 years. So you end up here, what is this? Okay, 1.05, right?
Oh, okay, because of time.
You power of 10 years, right? This is like, okay, actually we would minus one. So that will be 63%, right? It will be 63%. But if it's say a higher interest rate for short term, let's say it's 10%, we make it 10%, right? And we do it for 2 years, minus one, you are actually only paying 21%. So you're still paying more for the 10-year loan than
Yeah.
a 2-year loan, even though the interest rate, the annualized interest rate is lower. So don't be confused when we say a lower longer term rate, it's an annualized rate. So you still end up paying more if you're borrowing for a longer term. So it
Okay.
actually does make sense that interest rate actually could be lower for a longer term. Okay, now I'll show you the important thing. Okay, so this is the yield curve. So when we talk about interest rate, the interest rate is different for different term. The residual maturity here is talking about this. So which line are we looking for? Okay, so the blue line is the current yield curve, and then the dotted green and this orange line is like a month ago and 6 months ago. So basically, this chart is just trying to show that the yield curve has been like have done a parallel downward shift, right? So everything seems to be moving lower. As you know, the overnight interest is about 5.33 just now, right? This one doesn't actually show overnight. It shows the lowest is a month. 1 month is like about 1.38, right? Slightly higher than the overnight interest. As you can see, as you go higher in maturity, you have this inverted curve, right? The inverted yield curve. So normally the yield curve is upward sloping. But right now we have this weird situation where it is inverted, but longer term interest rate is actually a little bit higher. But if you see, for example, a 30-year interest rate right now for a US bond is 4.6%. We're talking about a government bond, right? 4.6%. But for a 1 month bond, it's a 5.38%. So you'll be wondering, like, wow, how is it possible that, like, oh, this is so weird, right? So if I borrow for 30 years, I can borrow at a lower interest rate than now I'm borrowing for, like, for example, in this case, it's 6 months. So does this actually look very confusing to you? Okay, actually, before even talking about that, here, wait, what do I want to say? Oh yeah, okay. So the overnight interest rate, the interest rate is determined by Fed, right? I told you that the Fed is able to control the interest rate. It can make sure that it's within a certain target band, right? For example, right now the interest rate for overnight is 5.25 to 5.5%. So that is the target set by the Fed. So the interest rate the Fed funds rate should be somewhere between this two limit, the lower and upper limit. So it's right somewhere in the middle of 5.33, right? So so we know that the Fed is able to control overnight interest rate. But how about all these interest rate? Like who determine this interest rate? Like how do you get this interest rate? Like 4.5%, this one is like what, 4.7%? Like who determine this interest rate? Is it the Fed? Do you think?
The base one, yes, I would think is a fact. And then the rest might be the banking
It's
or
actually not the
the
it's
institution.
it's actually not the Fed that controls the interest rate for longer term bonds. These are actually determined by the market. So these are entirely based on
When
supply
you
and
say
demand from the
market
market.
is the stock exchange market.
Uh, no, this is the bonds market. Okay,
Oh,
so what we're talking about right now is like the government bonds. So treasury bonds, they have like a 12-year maturity, 1 year, 2 year maturity, a 30-year maturity, right? So all these bonds are actually traded in the bond market. So you can think of a bond market like a stock market where
yeah,
people can buy and sell bonds.
yeah.
So bond prices has an inverted relationship with the yield of the bond. So as the price of the bond gets higher, the yield of the bond gets lower. So if you think of it like a zero coupon bond, if the face value is $99, you get $100 at the end, right? So you have a $1 interest, which means that uh, if the bond price goes down from 99 to $98, you get $2 interest, right? When you reach maturity. So as the bond price goes down, that means the cost of the bond is lower, but you end up getting the same amount of money back. So that's why you have this inverted relationship between bond price and yield. And from this buying and selling of bonds in the market, the Fed actually has no control over this. The Fed can influence it by doing the quantitative easing, but let's not complicate things now. Let's just say the Fed has no power over this. This is purely just the market doing, right? So so the yield curve, you can think of it as the market trying to figure out the interest rate by itself. So for example, if this interest rate right now is 4.6%, right? Like a 30-year interest rate is 4.6. So if you are somebody who has money that you probably maybe think that I can lend it to the government for 30 years. And I see 4.6%. You know what? That's a pretty good yield. So I'll buy, right? I'll buy it. If everybody thinks like you because they think that the interest rate is high, so everybody starts to buy it, that will cause the bond price to go up and the yield to go down, right? So at the end of the day, all the buying and selling just means that the market agrees that the 30-year interest rate of 4.6% is just about right for a 30-year. It's not too high and not too low. Because if it's too high, people will keep buying it, right? Causing the yield to go down. If it's too low, people will sell it and then they will get the yield to go up. So
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so uh there is this play at play.
Yep.
And the thing that you might be interested is what determine too high or too low. I don't really know whether I should go into this, but you can think of it in terms of this way. This this actually kind of show that the market expect interest rate in the future to start coming down and to start going up in the future, right? So basically for a 20-year bond, we're thinking in 20 years time, like the interest rate is about like 4.7%.
Yep.
Okay, or we can think of it in terms of this way. Like for example, let's say a 10-year bond. A 10-year bond is like 4.5%, right? So what can you do now? You can buy a 10-year bond now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you can buy a 2-year bond at a higher interest rate. And then after 2 years, you roll another 6-year bond.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can every 2 year you just keep on rolling. So 2 years you roll to a next 2-year bond. Then after the fourth year you roll to another 2-year bond. So you can keep rolling the bond, right? And until it's 10 years. there is you can do it this way, or you can just straight away buy a 10-year bond like right now. But what's the
Okay.
difference between rolling a bond
Mm.
every 2 years versus buying a 10-year bond now? So buying a 10-year bond now means that you already know the interest rate for 10 years, right? Right now it's telling you this is you're locking in the rate of 4.5%. But if it's a 2-year bond, you're locking it at a 4.8% rate, like 4.9%. But after 2 years, do you think the 2 years bond after 2 years is 4.9%? You wouldn't know, right? What's going
Mm.
to happen in the future. So a 10-year, you lock in. But what happens if after 2 years, interest rate falls down to near zero? Because if not, everybody would think that it's 4.9%. Every 2 years, I just roll 4.9, right? But that's
Mm.
not the case. So
Mm.
basically, what the market is saying that, okay, 2 years is 4 is higher. But comes to 4 year, the next interest rate will become lower.
Mm.
So, so, so in terms of a market implied forward rate, is that if you keep rolling based on the implied forward rate, the 10-year rate will come up to average 4.5%.
Yep, got it. So
Yeah,
bond as a product, I mean, from my understanding, bond is just the government borrowing money from the population, the consumers. Is that only government, or how about institution? Can they?
everybody borrows money.
Okay,
The whole the
they can also sell bond. The banks, the institution, it's the same thing, right?
uh
Or quite similar is in terms of
yeah, every company
the meaning of bonds. Mm.
yes, yes, yeah. So a bond is just a debt, a way for you to borrow money. And but for most people, like even for you or
Wait,
even
a
like a smaller
bond
company,
that
hold
for
on, I just
the 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 lenders or the government.
uh sorry, can you repeat that again?
The bond is more for is more for the lenders, which is a financial institution or the government, isn't it? So they will sell bond. The consumer will give the money to them in return for certain interest.
Yes, that's correct. But like this kind of debt runs the economy of the world. Like without the ability for people to borrow money, we will not the economy will not become what it is of
So
today.
in terms of
So everybody borrows money.
yeah, so
It
in
could
terms of
be
financial product, let's say from the bank, what is the difference between me as consumer buying a bond and putting my money in the savings bank? Both ways, I give my money to the bank as well, isn't it?
um okay
But
not
the interest is different.
okay. Remember that I told you that the bank deposit rate is very low
Yes,
because the bank doesn't actually need your cash that
yes,
desperately, right? So first of all, the bank is not going it's not going to pay you a high interest for
savings.
the yeah. But normally it's like a term deposit. You put in for like a year or more, they will give you a higher interest rate.
Yep.
But even that, the interest rate is also not
It's
really
also very
that
low. Yes.
yeah, it's not really that attractive. But the problem with putting money with the bank is that there is also a counterparty risk. So there might be a chance that the bank might go bankrupt.
Mm.
But I think there's a insurance deposit, insurance that if your bank account has under maybe like say $200,000 or something, uh, the government can bail you out. Basically,
Mm.
they will they will pay you the money. The
Back.
reason why,
Mm.
yeah, they will get back to you. But you don't have to be afraid that your money will be gone. That's because the government want to prevent a bank run. So back in the past, right, like many years ago, like maybe in the 20s or something, they have like a lot of banks in the US. But then if there is a rumor that the bank is going to go bankrupt, everybody will go line up, and then because they are afraid that once the bank goes bankrupt, they will lose all their money, right? So they want to withdraw the money out. But it could be just a rumor, right? It could be a rumor from a competitor, just spreading false rumor, and then the bank will just go bust. Even if there's nothing wrong with the bank, if everybody rush to withdraw all the money out, the bank's not able to pay you the money, right? Because the thing is, the bank is in the business of lending money. So they take the money that they borrow from you and they lend it out longer term. So if everybody wants money out right away, they cannot, they cannot turn out the money because their money is already, they only reserve like the required reserve, and they keep a portion of the money for the kind of withdrawal.
Yeah.
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 So the government wants to prevent this kind of bank run. So they guarantee people, that, okay, you don't have to worry. If your bank account is under a certain amount of money, you don't have to worry.
Mm.
But then, what if your bank account has more than $200,000? Right? Say you have like $1 million. Oh, then it's no longer protected. At least only the first $200,000 protected. The rest of them is not protected. So for most people, they are not going to put so much cash into the banks because the banks might just go bust. They might lose their money. But but a treasury bond or bills are as good as cash. So whenever uh you see companies, if they have a lot of revenue, they have a lot of cash, and they don't want to, for some reason, pass out the revenue as dividend. You want to keep it within their company. They're not going to keep the money cash in like bank deposits. First of all, interest rate is low. Second is there's counterparty risk. They will always buy government bonds. So it depends on the currency, right? If it's US dollar, they will buy US bonds. If it's British pound, they will buy the gilt. So it depends on, they will always like buy government treasury bonds.
Yep.
It's as good as cash. Yeah.
So government bonds as consumer, where do we buy these products from? Is it through the banks,
Uh,
direct with the
okay.
market or something?
Okay. Normally, for day-to-day people, they don't actually buy government bonds because the notional is very high. And the interest rate is also very low. I mean, in this case, right now the interest rate is quite high, so it does actually make sense for you to park your money in the bonds. But normally they will buy bonds from say like a company that actually even pay a higher interest rate. So it's just like when you borrow money from the bank, they'll add a buffer to it, right? So company is also, they will add because company has a counterparty risk to it, so they will always add a margin on top of it. So sometimes people will buy corporate bonds, from companies. Like for example, you can buy Apple bonds, but you don't actually have to buy Apple stocks. You can actually buy Apple bonds. Actually, Apple need to raise money, borrow money as well, right? So they will issue bonds to the public, and the public is to subscribe or they buy from the secondary market. Then they will pay whatever interest rate that the market determine based on what the market views about Apple default risk. Anyway, I think we talk a lot about this interest rate. I think we need to move on. Okay. Okay. Next, we talk about inflation. So this is the okay. Have you heard of the PCE inflation?
Heard of it, but not exactly sure what it is.
Okay, so PCE is the personal consumption expenditure. So it's a way for you to it's actually the Fed's preferred way to measure inflation. So there are two types of inflation that the market in general see in order to determine what is the inflation rate in the economy now. Okay, the whole reason why the Fed was increased interest rate back in 2022, early 2022, is because of the very high inflation rate due to the COVID pandemic crisis. So it caused a lot of supply side issue. Unable to ship the products for various reasons, and also a lot of people, they're staying at home, so they just kept buying online shopping, and all this drive prices very high, right? So So inflation went up. So inflation is actually the change in the prices. So one way, so there's two ways to do the market look at. So one way is the PCE inflation, another way is the CPI inflation. So PCE is the government, the Fed preferred choice of inflation measure. So how the PCE inflation is calculated is they will calculate the price. For example, in March 2024, right? They will calculate 122. This one I think it's just an index. So they index it based on 2017. So what this index 2017 equals 100 means that we just make arbitrary a date, like a year 2017, we put it 100. So this means that from March to 2017, there is a 22.7% rise in price for the goods consumption in this case. So what they can do is they look at the March 2024 and February. So this is like a month, right? So they see how much is the increase, the percentage increase, and that will be the inflation for a month. So in this case, we can actually calculate this. So for example, 122.769, you divide it by 122.374 and minus 1, right? So that will be the, wait, is it that low? 122.769. Yeah, this one, I'm not exactly sure why this is so low. I need to, because the month over month should be, oh yeah, it's 0.3%. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Because, okay, so this one is, okay, so uh, I don't know whether you follow the computation. So after you do this, right, you have to minus 1, right? So this actually means 0.003, right? And you multiply it by 100, so it'll be around 0.3%. So this is the correct figure. So month over month inflation is 0.3%. So 0.3% for 1 month, if you multiply by 12, so it's about 3.66% interest for 1 year. If you think about it, the Fed wants to reduce the interest rate to 2%, right? So ideally, you want the month over month to be 0.2% interest, right? 20 basis. Because if you multiply by 12, you will get something like 2.4%. So somewhere between 0.15 to 0.2% month over month interest, inflation is kind of like the ideal. So when you see it's like 0.3%, like just now we calculate like 0.3 something, right? It's considered high. 0.4 is even higher. But if you see something around 0.2, then you can be quite you can feel quite sure that inflation is not that high. But right now it's rather high. But this is the headline inflation of PCE. Okay, I will
So
tell you what's yeah.
yeah, so I'm curious also to know that how does PCE and also interest rate uh affect the investment performance and the outcomes that gets to the investors.
Okay, before that, first of all, the PCE is not the inflation. So what exactly is PCE? Like we
Con-
talk about PCE inflation, like for example, CPI inflation is very easy to understand, right? The definition of CPI is that they take a basket of goods that you can buy from the supermarket and also elsewhere, maybe like a car, insurance, gas price, whatever. So you have a fixed basket of goods. So that is CPI, right? That's easy to understand. But
Mm.
how about PCE? What exactly is PCE? If I look at this, we can see that PCE is comprised of goods and services, right? Like durable goods, non-durable goods, services. But what exactly is PCE? So PCE is actually part of the GDP. So if you if you do like uh, basic macroeconomics back in university, right? Or even back in like this high school, sometimes they will teach you that, GDP equals to consumption plus investment plus uh, government spending plus net imports, right? So you add export minus import. So all this is like the components of GDP. So PC is just a consumption part, the consumption part of the GDP calculation. So the inflation is the price change from the consumption from this month
Yeah.
from the previous month. So that is the inflation. So that is a change in the price. Okay. So back to your question, right? So how does inflation affect? Uh, so you're talking about yourself, right? Or you're
Investment.
talking about
Yeah, correct. Our my stuff like S&P 500, for example.
okay. If you're talking in terms of the stock market, so inflation has a very complicated, not so straightforward, clear-cut relationship with the stock market.
To
If we're
be
talking about yeah, what ideally we want is a moderate inflation number, like 2% is considered uh quite high. Okay, let's I know 2% is considered just right. It's the inflation that we want.
Yep.
So if we look at this, right? So this is the PCE index. So this is the PCE that we see just now in the GDP, but this is index 2017, right? This is the number that you see here. So these are the number here, right? And so in order for you to see the inflation, you need to look at the percentage change from a year ago. So this one would just compare, like, for example, this is like uh, March 2024. So they'll look at the index from March 2024 and March 2023. They just look at the change in the percentage change. So compared to last year, March 2023, there is a 2.7% rise in headline inflation. So this is the what we talk about in terms of inflation. So you can see that um, so the so it was like low inflation, lowish. Like we had low inflation, pretty much like 2% is like the ideal situation. But a lot of time we are actually lower than 2% for many years, man. Last time
So
it used to be very high. Like back in
so
the 80s, it's very high,
what happens
and
to
then
that
now
part where it goes below the zero datum?
inflation.
So it goes,
Okay,
yeah, at 20, 29, 20,
yeah,
20.
that's the financial. That's the great financial crisis during the dot com. No, this is the subprime crisis. During subprime, it actually went down to below zero. So when it goes below zero, we call it deflation.
Mm.
Okay, so there is two problems with inflation. If the inflation is too high, it's a problem. If the inflation is too low, even especially if it goes down to zero, below zero, it's called a deflation. It's even more problematic than inflation.
Mm.
So ideally, we want the inflation to be slightly higher than zero, which 2% is the just right amount. But if it's like very close to zero or even negative, it's considered very bad. You want to guess like why is deflation a bad thing?
It's because people at that time start to spend much lesser, and that will be bad for businesses.
Yeah, but why would they spend lesser? I
Uh,
mean, would they
Probably at
spend
that
more
time,
because prices went down, right? I want to buy more.
probably at that time is because an global event that happened during that time, or for some reason there is war, or you know or global issues. So
Okay,
they have concerns, so they start
the thing with
not buying.
deflation. Okay, the problem with deflation is that it has there's a the there's a vicious cycle to it. So if prices keep falling, right, that means you will delay the consumption because you know that the price is going to fall next month even more. So why do you buy now, right? You just wait 1 month later. But if you know that the following month is also going to drop, then why do you buy a month later? So you will just keep delaying consumption, right?
Yeah.
So this is like one bad thing about inflation,
Mm.
but deflation.
Deflation.
So
Yeah.
so inflation is a small increase in inflation is actually good because if you know that prices is going to increase, so there's no reason for you to delay purchase, right? You might as well just buy it now, right? Because
Yeah.
it's going to be more expensive in the future.
Mm.
And also another way is okay. Another thing is like what caused what caused inflation? Like how does it come about? And why is there in the normal run of the economy that inflation is it seems to be always going up?
Maybe because interest went down and people are more willing to spend.
Okay, so what happened when you spend? Okay, that's what you say about interest rate, right? So like the Fed will control the interest rate, like they will lower or hike interest rate because they want to.
Yep.
I mean, the ultimate reason is because of inflation, right? But how does the lowering, cutting or hiking interest rate, how does it actually affect inflation? So one way you were saying that lower interest, but it could be
Okay.
for other reason as well. But like what
When
exactly caused?
there's a stimulus from the government, for example, to give to the population
Let's
for
say there's no let's say there's no stimulus. Let's say it's pretty neutral. So let's say the interest rate right now is like 2%, right? And the inflation is also about 2%. So in the sense that both are about 2%. So but what does that mean? If the economy is healthy, it is growing. Basically, the economy is growing. But okay, so the definition of a uh, recession is that the growth is negative. So rather than growing, it's actually shrinking. So that's the definition of recession, right? Your economy actually shrunk.
yeah.
So like normally they produce X amount of goods and services, but if it's a recession, they will actually produce less.
Mm.
So so in a normal economy, inflation is growing, right? But what has it got to do with inflation? Like how are they related? Okay, I'll just tell you lah. I mean, I'm also not an expert on this, but from my understanding is that uh, so normally uh, companies they they make money by selling products, right? Like goods and services. So sometimes they can make more profit by raising the price of their products, right?
Yeah.
So they raise the price of their products to make more money, and
Mm.
then yeah, so that has a inflationary response to it. But in a
Yeah.
normal growing economy, rising prices is actually quite normal.
Yeah.
And then once prices becomes higher, people will ask for increase in their wages, right? So when they ask for increase in wages, that will also drive up prices to go even higher. So it's
Yeah.
like a feeding effect, right?
It's
So
like
prices, yeah, so prices over time in a growing economy is that it will tend to go up.
yeah.
Because if it tends to go down, if your prices starts going down, that means it would affect the bottom line of the company, right? So their revenue would seem to go down as well, right? So the revenue goes down, they might lay off workers or they might cut your wages or whatever. So in the end, they have another kind of spiral effect in the sense that it will cause the economy to contract.
Mm.
So you want the economy to grow. So
Mm.
inevitable side effect of a growing economy is that the prices will tend to rise. But
Yeah.
then you will say, then why is inflation a bad thing then if prices are increasing? Then that's a good thing, right? So why do we uh like why are we worrying about this?
Mm.
So we don't worry if the inflation is low, but if the inflation is high, then it's a big problem. It's actually very problematic because first of all, rapid increase in prices cause a lot of uncertainty, right? And it causes people to not be able to plan well in the future.
Yeah.
Another way to see it is that, okay, so what's the difference between 2% and 3%? Like, why does the Fed say a 2% interest is inflation is good, but a 3% inflation is not good? Or even say like a 1% inflation. What is the magic number about 2%? The 2%,
Well, historically that was proven.
um, it's just a arbitrary number. It
Mm.
doesn't actually makes 2% is more like a pretty comfortable number. It's not too high, it's not too low, right? It's like a Goldilocks number. It's not too warm, not too cold. But the 2% is quite arbitrary. It could be 2.5%, it could be 3% as well. The main thing about inflation is that as long as the number doesn't keep changing, right? If it's 3% all the way, then it's not really a problem, because businesses and everything can still plan well ahead, right? They know that inflation is always growing around 3%,
Yeah.
then they can plan ahead. So that's not a big problem. But
Mm-hmm.
inflation keeps moving 3 to 4 to 5, back to 4, 5, 4, 3, 2,
Yeah.
then it could be like there are a lot more uncertainty. And of
Right.
course, if the 3% is 30% and it's not 3%, or then even though if it's 30% all the way, it's still considered a bad thing, right? Because the changes is too much. You don't want to, for example, you will go buy fish today in the market, and then you buy fish next year, the price increase at 30%, right? I mean, the increase is too much for most people to be able uh, to accept. I mean, even though it sounds kind of subjective, but it's better for the price not to change that drastic. So, a rather low inflation is quite okay. Which is
Mm.
why a lot of people are saying that. And even though right now we seem to be stuck, like it seems like we cannot go down to like 2%. Like 2% is right here, right? But if it stays around this area, it's actually still not that bad.
Mm.
Which is why the Fed right now they are not hiking rates any further, because they know that as long as inflation is around this area, they are comfortable with it. But they
Mm.
still want the inflation to go down to 2% before they start to cut rates. So they are not cutting rates until inflation goes down to, or it shows a trend that is trending down to 2%, like a convincing trend. And another thing I need to take note is the f- the f- the Fed don't target the headline inflation. The Fed targets the core inflation. So this is the core inflation. So core PCE is the headline inflation, but you exclude food and energy. The reason why they exclude food and energy, like energy is like gas price, like natural gas, or the energy price, is because these numbers are this food and energy prices are quite volatile. From
Yeah.
a month to month basis, it changed a lot. So they are saying that like, because it's so volatile, it might muddle the true
Mm.
picture of inflation. So they exclude that, and they look at the other components of for PCE case will be the consumption of other components other than food and energy. But don't be mistaken, food and energy, despite being excluded from the core PCE, but it still indirectly go into the prices of other goods and services, because maybe not so much food, but at least energy is an input to a lot of things, right? Like, if gas prices goes up, energy prices goes up, your business costs will also go up, right? So all these will actually affect the other components of PCE.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Jason, for all your valuable insight and information so far. Do you have any key summary for us as takeaway advice,
Uh,
or anything that you might foresee in the near far future?
okay. Before we come to that, there's actually a lot of stuff that we don't have the time to cover, but
Mm.
hopefully we cover in the future things like the job market, the housing price, all these stuff that is also is very important, in the sense that the Fed is actively looking at these prices to make sure that they are coming down before they will cut rates. And so right now we don't really have the time to go into that. But to answer your question about the so so right now, if you look at the PCE, you can see that the trend is coming down,
Mm.
right? And back in the high of like 5%, it has started to drop quite a lot,
Yep.
down to almost 2%. Note that the 2.8 is actually higher than the headline inflation. So because recently gas prices have dropped a lot, which is why headline inflation is actually lower than core inflation, and food prices has dropped a lot as well,
Yep.
which this is higher. But the main trend is still trending down. So this is a good thing that is happening. But the Fed still want to see a convincing going down to 2% before they will cut rates. And also, the way the way we look at all this data is that these data are all backwards looking. For
Yep.
example, you look at this. This is like what, March 2024, right?
Yep.
You want to tell us what month is it right now?
Ready to 2 months after. Now it's
It's really
ready.
May, right? This is
Mm.
really May. So basically, in a few weeks' time, I know okay, the CPI is coming out this week.
Mm.
This
Mm.
week the CPI will be out. The PC will be like the end of the month. So every time the report that comes out this month is a report of the previous month.
Yep.
Because all the statistics and information, all these prices, they need time to go and collect and tabulate before they can release it, right?
Yep.
So what I'm trying to say is that all these are data that are backwards looking. So by the time it reach to you, it's already kind of stale.
Mm.
What we are interested in, I mean, what the Fed is interested in is what is the inflation now, right? Not so much what is the inflation a month ago.
Yep.
Yeah, because the thing is, if the Fed waits until the inflation comes down to 2%, then they start cutting the rates. It will be too late because by then, by the time they start cutting rates, the inflation might even go down lower, right? Because remember, they want it to be at 2%, not
Yep.
lower. So first of all, there's a risk that inflation will go down to really low and even to negative uh, territory. That will be the deflation, right? So
Yep.
that's a big no-no. And
Okay.
another thing is a higher interest rate will cause recession. So right now, okay. So another thing, okay, before we end, this is one final thing I want to say. So what the Fed wants to do right now is to engineer a soft landing. So soft landing means that I'm able to fight inflation, but not cause a recession. Or even if I cause a slow downturn in economy, it's just a moderately slowing down the economy and not too hard of a slow. So there's soft landing and hard landing. Hard landing means that I fight the inflation, but at the cost of causing the economy to go down to a recession. So that is a hard landing. And then a no landing scenario is like the best of all
Crash.
world, right? I I'm able to fight inflation without causing the economy to
Oh,
shrink, to reduce at all. It's still very strong. There's no landing.
no landing.
And what is the worst scenario? Okay, so we have no landing, soft landing, and hard landing. So what is the worst case scenario? After I say this, we can end the call. So the worst case scenario is
Neutral landing.
stagflation.
Hey, what?
It's stagflation. Have you
Stack?
heard of it before? Stagflation?
No. No.
Yeah, so stagflation is
Stagnant?
stagnant economy and inflation. So it means that I raise interest rate until it's very high, but yet inflation is still high. So the interest rate not only no sorry it's okay. So you have high inflation, and you also have a very high, a very you have a recession, like a very bad economy. So basically, that is like the worst case scenario. So what they did is, okay, they raise interest rate, right? They raise interest rate to fight inflation, but inflation is still high, and they cause a recession. But the recession or Okay, normally if it's a recession, probably inflation will go down as well. Because of a recession has a deflationary effect on the economy. But what is a bad thing is, it's not really a very hard recession, but it's like a very stagnant economy. So your economy is very stagnant. It's not really growing, but yet you still have the problem of inflation. So during a stagnant economy, what does the Fed needs to do? They need to cut interest rate, right, to stimulate the economy, correct? But by cutting interest rate, it will cause inflation to go up, which is what the Fed doesn't want to do because now inflation is very high. So in order to fight inflation, they have to raise interest rate. But raising interest rate will cause the economy to even go down harder. So at the end of the day, the Fed either strategy will cause one of them to go worse. So that is a very problematic situation.
Okay.
Which is a stagflation. Yeah. Okay. So finally, I want to say is that it seems like right now we might be able to achieve at least a soft landing. So which means that the Fed if the inflation starts coming down further, the Fed can cut interest rate and avoid a recession. And in terms of the stock market, so the stock market is already pricing in a cut in the Fed funds rate. There'll be 2 interest rate cuts this year, according to the Fed funds futures. But let's see. We will see how it goes. The earliest cut, I reckon, would probably be in the September FOMC meeting. And because recently the job report that just came out last week was softer than expected, which is a very good news. And if the job market continue to show weakness, the Fed might even cut in July. And for your stock market, if the Fed were to cut in July, the market will rally like crazy. Because you are in the best of both worlds now, right? You have the Fed is cutting interest rate and economy is not going down the recession, which means companies are still making money, their earnings are still very well, and the valuation of all these companies will continue to be high and even higher if the interest rate were to come down, and that means the market will continue to decline. But that is on the based on the fact that the Fed will cut the interest rate and we're not going into a recession or a hard landing.
I see.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Okay.
Cool. So
very much.
All right, thanks.
I have learned a lot today on interest rate. I'm sure there would be future more sessions of this to continue this topic into more in depth of various other aspects of interest rate and or other investment as well. Thanks so much.
Yes. If the viewers are interested, we will definitely make more such videos.
All right.
All right. We'll see you in the next week podcast.
Thanks all.
All right. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.